everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. I am Julia Bello, and I will be hosting this session with my colleague Daniel Johnson. We are both academics from the School of Economics, Finance, and Accounting within the Faculty of Business and Law. You're welcome to Coventry University Green Week session on sustainable pension, and we have guest delivery from Timeline App Tech Limited. Daniel, say hello.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Daniel Johnson, and I'm hosting with Jalia. A few things that I want to talk about. Again, welcoming everyone here. It's really a delight to see the host person, the presenter, Toyosi here today, and also all of you joining in to really contribute to this conversation we're having during our Green Week. And I'd like to really stress housekeeping issues here. I just try not to. Probably you can put your video on, which is fine, but I've muted everybody so that you won't be able to have any issues, or we won't have any issues on the line today, particularly. But you have the chat room to please ask questions, and feel free to put in any questions you have, and we'll be able to respond to it towards the end of the presentation as well. So, Jalia, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And I just want to add that use the chat box and tell us where you are coming from. Just feel relaxed about this session. We're recording only for education purpose, so feel free to tell us where you're coming from. What is our Green Week? So I just want to let you know that this is an annual partnership that we have between Coventry University, the University of Warwick, our student unions, Coventry City Council, Warwick District Council, and you. So everybody is involved. And the idea is that we celebrate the environment and then we promote what we do across the region. I'm happy to see that our group sustainability manager is on the call too. So hi, Selena. We promote what we do across the region and we educate everyone on day-to-day activities, how you can be more sustainable. This session today is on sustainable pension. Next slide, please, Daniel. Yeah, and it will be delivered by Mr. Toyosi Lewis from Timeline App Tech Limited. Toyosi is pension and technical consultant at Timeline App Tech Limited. Toyosi has experience in financial services and consulting with the Big Four. Well done, Toyosi. He has the investment management certificate qualification and is a member of the CFA Society in the UK and the Chartered Insurance Institute. Toyosi is also a content contributor with Timeline App and is often writing articles on retirement and sustainable withdrawal framework. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for joining us today. So whenever you're ready, please share your slides and begin your presentation. Thank you.
Jalia, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Leanne. Good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Toyosi Lewis. I work with Timeline App. Before I actually go into my presentation this afternoon, I'll tell you a couple of things about both the company that I work for and the individual who actually founded the company. So Timeline App is a software that is used by financial planners or financial advisors, which is probably a more common term. And they use this to basically advise clients. So you can imagine if you are not necessarily close to retirement, you could even be where you are now. You could be in your late 20s, 30s, whatever it is, and you are thinking about retirement. And you would go to a financial advisor and you would say, this is what I intend to achieve by way of either putting aside certain monthly contributions just so I can save up until the time when I would think of actually retiring, or you may be a few years away from retirement. So again, you could be around sort of like the mid 50s, thereabouts, and say, I'm thinking about retiring in a couple of years. How can you help me? Now, the financial advisor would basically go on what they call a fact-finding mission to basically ask you certain questions to sort of understand what it is you are seeking to achieve how you intend to get there, what you currently do, are you working, all that kind of stuff. That's what a financial advisor would do. They would then advise you about the best way to get to your destination. So, i.e., if your goal as a young person, for example, is to save X amount over the next 10, 20 years or 30 years, the financial advisor would basically guide you or tell you the steps you need to take. So they will tell you, you know, this is how much you need to contribute. Potentially, this is where you need to invest what you're contributing, and so on and so forth. The flip side, again, if you are a few years away from retirement, the financial advisor would say, you know, where have you been investing your pension funds previously, and when do you hope to start taking your pension funds, and all that kind of stuff. Now, where does timeline come into this whole sort of big process of financial advice? Now, a financial advisor would use timeline to actually stress test or illustrate the possibility of you, the client, attaining your retirement goals. So timeline as a tool is made up of a lot of data, and essentially what it does is it takes into account individuals' pensions or pension assets that they might have, not just pensions, so things like ISAs as well, because people save in an ISA as part of their contribution to their retirement. People save in all types of investment accounts. You can imagine if you have been, so let's assume, you know, you currently work with the university, you are in your, I don't know, 50s, early 50s, late 40s, thereabouts. This probably isn't your first job. Let's assume you've worked somewhere else. So let's assume you've worked with another university. So potentially you may have 2 or 3 pensions or even 4 pensions, you know, depending on how many employers you've had in the past. So the role of the financial advisor would be to sort of ask you questions like, you know, how many pensions do you have? And then they'll bring all the pensions together. They'll use timeline to illustrate the likelihood of you taking money in retirement and the likelihood that that money will not run out when you are in retirement. So that is what timeline does. It's a software that basically illustrates the likelihood that a client or an individual would not run out of money when they are in retirement. Now, it is not a direct-to-consumer product, and that is timeline. So we don't sell the product to consumers directly. Our end clients are the advisors. So we only sell the tool to advisors, and obviously the advisors would use the tool with you, the client. So that is what Timeline app does, just to sort of give you some background there. If you come across the if you come across the term called cash flow modeling, which is quite common within financial planning circles, that may be a good way to sort of understand what Timeline does, because cash flow modeling tools are regularly used by financial advisors in retirement planning. So that is Timeline. And again, I work for Timeline, so I am the pension and technical consultant in Timeline. I essentially work very closely with financial advisors. I sort of show them how to use the tool. I answer any questions they might have. I run demo sessions for them and the rest of it. When was Timeline founded? Timeline was founded in 2017. And Timeline was founded by a man called Abraham Okunsanya. He was the one who actually started the business. So this was his idea. So prior to starting Timeline, Abraham he has a background in financial services, and he basically used to work in the banking industry. When he left the banking industry, he set up his own consultancy firm. His consultancy firm essentially was talking about retirement and financial planning, and he was basically providing advice to big consultancy firms or big financial planning firms. That was how he started his business. Now, out of the work he did as a consultant, running his own consultancy business, which was essentially advising financial advisors, advising big, pension companies, because he did that as well. He came up with the idea of Timeline. And this was how Timeline was born in 2017. So the concept of Timeline obviously would have come out from the work Abraham did as a consultant, owning his own retirement or owning his own consultancy firm. So he came up with the concept of Timeline. Obviously, it started off as a small business, and it has grown massively over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. Very interesting fact for all of you to know. Abraham is an alumni of the Coventry University. He did his master's at Coventry University, I think probably between 2005 and 2006, I think, or 2006, 2007. So he is your alumni. You know, if you do have the opportunity to meet with him, I'm sure you'll be pleased to. He's very interesting. Abraham is a very smart individual, and I say that not because it's a nice thing to say. He is very, very intelligent. He's widely respected in the financial planning community. He's known by the regulator, so he's well known by the FCA. He's well known by very big pension firms. He's people know him, and again, the reason why a lot of people know Abraham is because he approached retirement planning in an unconventional way, if I may use that term, because he didn't necessarily agree with the way people had, or financial advisors had approached retirement planning in the past, and he felt there was a better way to do it. Hence, the reason why he launched Timeline app to help financial advisors approach retirement planning in a different way. So just some useful context and some background around what Timeline app is, the company, the founder of the company, who is Abraham, and the fact that Abraham is an alumnus of your great university. So this is your annual Green Week, which I believe started yesterday. And I hope you guys have enjoyed the sessions or the events that you've had so far. I have been kindly invited by your staff to run this afternoon session. And I will be looking at sustainable pensions within the sort of wider framework of ESG. Now, obviously, ESG is a very topical issue. It has been for some time. The phrase ESG, if I remember correctly, that probably came into the financial parlance, I think around 2005. I think that was around the first time people started talking about the concept of ESG. Now, again, it's a well-used phrase. Within the last 7 years, I believe, about 6-7 years, it has gained a lot of traction in the financial world for obvious reasons, and we'll look at that in my presentation. But one of the things I'm going to be talking to you about this afternoon is, what is ESG and what does it mean to different people? Because again, we've probably all heard about ESG, and it's a phrase or a term that you can Google ESG and you'll see different sort of definitions about what ESG is. But what I will try to do this afternoon is I will try to distill the difference between ESG as a concept and another concept called social responsible investing, or SRI, which is another term that I'm guessing a lot of us have heard of. Now, on the face of it, you may ask, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between social responsible investing and what is the difference with ESG? There is a difference. It's quite subtle, which is why I will try to highlight the difference. And I'm starting from this point because within the financial world, as it were, not necessarily everyone distinguishes that subtlety between social responsible investing and ESG. So, and that is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. I guess it's just because ESG is relatively new, or the concept of social investing is relatively new, and people may sometimes, I don't want to say confused, but they may sometimes explain one in terms of the other. So I'll look through sort of social responsible investing. I'll also talk about ESG and what it means, and then we'll look at sort of sustainable pensions, i.e., how do ESG factors, or how are ESG factors, how are they incorporated into things like pensions, into things like investing? Because again, I'm sure a lot of us have read about this, every single day. A lot of the big companies, for example. So if you sort of think about the largest asset managers out there, so people like BlackRock, or people like Vanguard, or people like State Street, they are like the 3 largest asset managers globally, and they are leading the charge for example, on the concept of environment, social, and governance investing, because they manage literally trillions of dollars in client assets. They have a massive role to play, and they understand that they have a role to play. Hence the reason why they are part of the big institutional investors out there who are actually leading the charge on investing. So sustainable pensions. So my sort of first slide, let me just do this properly, is going to look at the difference, like I said, between ESG and SRI. Because again, just at the risk of sounding like a broken record, there are some differences between ESG and SRI. So what is ESG and what is social responsible investing? ESG, the acronym, refers to environmental, social, and governance. That is what it means. And whilst you might hear about, oh, ESG investing, it is not entirely what some people think it is. Because some people might think, oh, ESG investing means I am investing in a fund that somehow meets some certain criteria. Now, again, in terms of definitions, because there are differences, people really need to understand the differences. Hence the reason why I will try to take the time to explain. So ESG is basically saying you have companies out there, right? And these companies, how are they running their businesses? You know, what are they doing as businesses in terms of their operations? And how do these businesses, how do the impact of environment, the social side, and the governance side, how does that impact the businesses of the company? Now, when you think about ESG, investors, and when I say investors, we can simply think of investors broadly along two lines. One would be institutional investors. So if you remember the names of the big firms I called just now, so people like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, they are investors, but they are institutional investors because they are big companies. So that's one class of investors. Then the other type of investors are retail investors. So retail investors are people like you and I. So whilst the institutional investors, they can invest, on behalf of their firms, you and I can also invest on behalf of ourselves. So those are the two types of investors. So investors would use ESG in making decisions, right? And how do they do that? They do that by saying, this company, for example, company X, do I want to invest my money in company X? And if I want to invest my money in company X, is company X taken into account, or how is company X taken into account environment factors and how that impacts company X's operations? How is company X taken into account social factors and how those social factors impact company X's operations? How is company X taken into account governance factors and how those governance factors affect company X's business operations? Now, environmental factors, social factors, governance factors, they don't always have to be negative. Yes, they could be risks, but they could also be opportunities. And the whole idea behind the concept of ESG is, if a company is faced with a factor that has to do with the environment. So for example, the big one that we all know is fossil fuels or carbon emissions, for example, within the environmental space. If we consider things like the social side of it, it is things like how do they treat their employees, their workforce, the concept of sort of child labor, human trafficking, and all that kind of stuff. And then obviously, when you consider governance factors, things like strong corporate governance, are there any conflicts of interest, for example, in terms of the sort of people that run the company? Now, ESG is basically saying the manner a company approaches these issues, again, it doesn't have to be a negative connotation. So it may well be a company sees an opportunity in environmental factors, or a company sees an opportunity in social factors, and they would then use those factors to their advantage in order to thrive as a business. So that's the impact of ESG on a company's operations. So an investor will then say, I am looking at this company. I think I like the way they've approached environmental factors or incorporated environmental factors into the business. I think I like the way they've incorporated social factors into the business, or I think I like the way they've incorporated governance factors into the business. And as a result of that, I would like to, invest in that company because, I like the fact that they are, basically taking into account these things going on. So that is ESG. ESG doesn't necessarily distinguish between financial returns and an individual's moral values. And this is where there is a difference between ESG and social responsible investing. With ESG, as an investor, you're just taking a view that I am very interested in how a company uses environmental factors to its advantage, or social factors or governance factors, and how responsible that company is. So that is ESG. What is social responsible investing? Now, social responsible investing, that is slightly different. So this is where, as individuals or as companies, you place a premium on a return. And what do I mean by that? As an individual, within the concept of social responsible investing, a financial consideration is not always your overriding objective. With ESG, you don't distinguish between a financial objective and a non-financial objective. You just look at a company, how have they taken into account, different factors, do I want to invest? But with social responsible investing, your number one or the overriding consideration is ethical for you, the individual, or it's moral. So before you think of what am I going to get by way of a financial return from investing in X, you're thinking, first of all, about, do I want to invest in X? Because are they into arms sales? Are they selling tobacco? Are they selling alcohol and all that kind of stuff? So that's the difference. So with social responsible investing, an individual's morals comes to the forefront. First of all, once they're satisfied that company X, company Y, or fund X or fund Y aligns with their moral or ethical values, then the second consideration for an individual would be the financial. So that's the subtle difference between when you hear people say ESG investing and social responsible investing. That is the subtle difference. Now, like I mentioned before, companies, when you talk about ESG, companies are measured on a broad criteria that takes into account environmental factors, governance factors, and the rest of them. How do companies, use the risks posed by these factors? And again, it doesn't always have to be risks. How do they take advantage of the opportunities, posed by these factors? And how do they incorporate those opportunities into their business model? And by incorporating those opportunities into their business model, how does that then set the company on a firm, sustainable financial footing for the future? With social responsible investing, the difference is I, as an individual, would conduct what we refer to as a positive screen or a negative screen. So again, remember, with social responsible investing, the overriding consideration for the individual is not financial. It's not the financial return, first and foremost. The overriding consideration for the individual, first and foremost, is, does this company fit my ethical values? Or does this company fit my moral values? So for example, has the company or has the fund been involved in anything that has to do with human rights abuses? Is the company making a profit from polluting the environment? Or is the company making a profit because they are not adhering to meeting climate change targets, for example? Or are they not incorporating diversity, into their processes as companies? Because these are the things as an individual that are dear to my heart. Or are they considering the impact of their operations on the environment? And are they investing in companies that are into sort of gambling? Because these are personal choices, right? These are things that individuals would. We all have our sort of ethical boundaries, as individuals. So if I were to consider a company who was investing in gambling or was supporting gambling, for example, I may not want to invest in that company. If there was a company who was heavily invested in fast food, for example, and I may take a view, again, it's a personal choice. Everyone doesn't have to agree with me. I may take a view and say, look, I don't like the fact that, or I believe that, fast food is not healthy and for X, Y, and Z, and therefore I choose not to invest in this company. So that's the difference, because with social responsible investing, as individuals, you will take a deliberate effort not to invest in the company. So financial returns is not your overriding consideration. So my next slide. Now, on this slide, I will then start to sort of go into the actual investing world, because now we've sort of looked at the differences between ESG as a very broad term and what it is, and social responsible investing and what that means, and the considerations that individuals and institutions actually take into account when they consider socially responsible investing, or when they consider investing that takes into account ESG factors. If we want to look about sustainable pensions, a lot of companies in recent times, and especially this has happened over the last 7 years, or I should say 6 to 7 years, there has been a huge focus on ESG investing, and rightly so, and rightly so, and that is because people are now more aware. We are all aware of what's going on, around us. Now, in your university this week, you guys are focusing on your Green Week. And I know that you guys know, obviously, what the Green Week is about. It's all about keeping the planet safe, ensuring that the planet is not polluted, not wasting energy, investing in electrical sources of energy, not degrading the environment. We all know what it is. And that has also spilled into the financial world, because a lot of investors are actually very passionate and actively involved in ESG investing. And by that, and because they realize that there are investors out there, so institutions realize that there are investors out there who wouldn't necessarily want to invest their money with large companies if those large companies aren't taking into account some of the things that I mentioned. So again, you could imagine if you have a big bank, or it doesn't have to be a bank. Let's take a company in the healthcare sector, for example. If that company is not considerate about environmental factors, or if it's not taking into account the opportunities that the current environment presents it, or if it's not taking into account the opportunities that current social factors presented, then that company is not really making the most of ESG criteria. Now, companies have taken a very strong stand on this, and they have said, look, we want to make ESG as part and parcel of our investment proposition. And that essentially says, when we create funds that people invest in, and obviously because funds, when you have a fund would normally be an amalgamation of different sort of companies. So you may have Fund A, and Fund A could be, I'm invested in Apple stocks, Amazon stocks, Netflix stocks, Tesla, and whatever it is. So companies are beginning to say, when we invest or when we create funds, and when we look at the composition of the funds, are we definitely sure that these funds, the companies that make up these funds, are we certain that these companies are actually making the most of ESG factors? So a lot of companies and pension schemes are doing this, and rightly so. But then when you talk about sustainable pensions, how does that impact you as an individual, or how does that impact an institution and as an investor as well? People might want to take a view, like I looked at previously, and say, if a company or if a fund isn't making the most of X, Y, and Z. So for example, if Fund A isn't taking a deliberate step to ensure that the composition of that fund has taken into account thoroughly ESG factors, then I don't think I want to invest in that fund. And why does pension come into the equation, or why is pension really important? A lot of pension schemes obviously are invested in, well, pension schemes are invested in funds. And it's massive, because you can imagine if you have companies out there who lose business because people don't want to invest with them, then you can imagine the impact that would have on them. As individuals, for example, remember I spoke about retirement, and I said you sort of have two categories of people when you talk about retirement. One category of people is what we refer to as accumulation clients. So accumulation clients are basically people who are younger, people who are not close to retirement, but obviously are thinking about retirement in a way of I want to save towards my retirement. That's one. And then you may also have people who are a few years away from retirement, and potentially they may be retiring over the next 4 to 5 years. So these groups of individuals, they could also say, if I am contributing into my pension, for example, I want to know where that pension, what fund that pension is invested in, and has that fund taken the companies within that fund, have they made the most of ESG criteria? Similar to an individual who is on the decumulation side. So again, someone who is a couple of years away from retirement, they may take a view. How, as a financial advisor, imagine if I was a financial advisor, how can I estimate, or how can I measure my client's attitude to ESG issues? And this is quite an important topic in financial planning, because one of the things that every good financial advisor would do, if you were to meet a financial advisor, because obviously you're trying to save for your retirement, which is obviously saving into your pension, one of the things a good financial advisor would do is to know your attitude to risk as their client. So if you imagine you went to meet a financial advisor and said, I want to save for my pension, I want to save for my retirement, they are keen to understand what your attitude to risk is. And by that, I mean, they want to know, are you willing to take more risk? So, i.e., invest in the stock market, because by definition, equities are more risky? Or are you willing to take less risk and invest in things like government bonds or corporate bonds, for example, because by definition, our bonds are less risky than equities or stocks. So that is something financial advisors do. However, with the introduction of ESG into the financial planning world, advisors are beginning to ask themselves, just as I am able to ask my client their attitude to risk, how can I also ask my client their attitude to ESG issues or to ESG investing? And even if I am able to understand the attitude of my client to ESG issues, how do I ensure that over time, over the long term, that remains consistent? And what do I mean? Imagine if you, as a client, you met your financial advisor today, he or she asks you your attitude to ESG, and you said, I'm very keen to invest, I'm very keen to invest in a company that is quite cognizant of environmental issues and governance issues. Let's try to keep it simple. And then the advisor comes up with a score, to sort of say, based on what you've told them, this is what they think your attitude to ESG is. And that's what it is now. And every single year, a financial advisor would have what they call an annual review with you. And again, this is to say, where we looked at your financial plan at the beginning, how are we from where we were? So imagine 5 years down the line, you've consistently said, as an individual, I am more interested in environmental issues and governance issues. And then in year 6, when you're meeting your financial advisor again to have your annual review, what if you then have a different view about your ESG? What if now you're not really interested in environmental issues, you're not really interested in governance issues, but now all you're interested in is the social side of it? You only want to invest in companies that are keen on diversity. You only want to invest in companies that are keen on that treat their workforce properly. You only want to invest in companies that are not using illegal labor or child labor. So what am I trying to say? As advisors try to understand their clients' attitudes to ESG, they need to come up with a framework that is consistent, because this is relatively new. There isn't necessarily a consistency currently in the industry. And by that, what do I mean? I could be a financial advisor. Daniel could be a financial advisor. He may ask questions to his clients and say, based on the questions I'm asking you, this is what I think. So we can have a risk profile from 1 to 10, taking into account ESG factors, right? I could also have a risk profile of 1 to 10, taking into account ESG factors. Myself and Daniel could separately ask our clients exactly the same questions. However, the manner in which we ask the questions or how we frame the questions, Daniel's client may end up with a risk score 5. My client could end up with a risk score 8 or a risk score 3. And that is what is currently happening. Advisors are trying to ensure that there is consistency in terms of, because again, ESG may mean different things to different people. So how do advisors measure the client's attitude to ESG? Regulatory issues. Obviously, the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the regulatory body for conduct risk in the financial services industry, they are currently shining a massive searchlight on the industry, especially when it comes to do with ESG issues. And one of the ways that the FCA has realized that they can actually get advisors to do the right thing by considering ESG is to ensure that any ESG consideration would be classed under what financial advisors or what the FCA refers to as a suitability rule. And suitability basically says, again, when you go to a financial advisor, your financial advisor is expected to do certain things, well, to do all things right, but they have to evidence everything they do with you, the client, and there has to be an audit trail. And if anything were to go wrong in terms of the advice that your financial advisor has given you, you could raise a complaint. And if the regulator investigates your complaint and realizes that your financial advisor hasn't or didn't do what they should have been doing, then that financial advisor potentially could be fined. Now, the regulator has taken a strong stand on ESG, and they've made this, or they will be making this, mandatory under suitable advice. So think about that. Currently, it hasn't been done yet, but when it is done, any individual going to meet their financial advisor, ESG considerations would be classed as advice suitability. So essentially, if your financial advisor is saying, I think you should be investing your pension here, or I think you should not be investing your pension there, within that framework, if they don't consider ESG factors, potentially that financial advisor would be at the mercy of the Financial Conduct Authority. So that is it's a massive area, and a lot of financial advisors, and this is why I said, how do advisors measure a client's attitude to ESG issues? This is why there's a huge focus on this. And obviously, why is there a huge focus on this, not just from a regulatory perspective? When you save for your retirement, you invest in a pension. When you have worked for many years and you put money aside for your pension, you expect that when you get to retirement, all you want to do is to have access to your money. And you don't want a situation where the funds you've put away, based on the advice you've been given by your financial advisor, hasn't returned as much as it should have. And if your financial advisor hasn't given you the right advice, and by right advice in this context, I'm saying if they haven't taken into account ESG factors, potentially that could become a problem as well. Can advisors incorporate ESG factors into fact-finding questionnaires? So I think I've touched on this previously when I said advisors need to understand how they incorporate ESG factors. Remember I said, normally when you go to a financial advisor, they embark on what we call a fact find. They start asking you questions about, how much do you have? Where do you work? How much do you earn? How long have you worked here? How much do you think you can put away for your retirement? How much do you think you can put away as a monthly amount for a contribution into your pension? So again, how do they incorporate ESG considerations into their fact-finding questionnaires? And the last one is, if we don't have a consistent definition of ESG in financial services, or if we don't have a consistent way of measuring ESG, and again, I know I've tried to touch on this previously, because again, like I said, if there were two financial advisors and we were basically asking the same question to our respective clients, but then client A was getting a risk score of 3 and my client was getting a different risk score, potentially there could be a problem. So how do advisors approach the issue of measuring, first of all, defining ESG, measuring ESG, and really taking into account, are companies actually making the most of environmental factors? On my slide, as you can see, I have a couple of visuals that broadly tries to incorporate, ESG considerations. So again, we can see there's a huge, or there have always been huge discussions about child labor, for example, illegal child labor. There was a company, I can't remember the name of the company now. It's based up in the Midlands. They had an issue. I think it was last year. They had an issue about the working conditions of their staff, and that had a massive impact on the share price of that company. Not only did it have a massive impact on the share price of that company, but a lot of big funds, like very massive, well-known pension funds that we all know, who had invested in that company, they literally had egg on their faces because they were invested in that company. That company hadn't taken into account, the social side of things in terms of the working conditions of their staff. Because if I remember correctly, a lot of the staff of that company were working in horrendous, working conditions. So there was a lot of negative press about that, and not only did it have a negative impact on the company in question, it also had an impact on the big pension funds that were actually invested in that company. The other visual that I have there is carbon emissions. And again, this is a very big topic, a topical issue. When we turn on the news, we always see this. And rightly so, because it is true that when we pollute the environment, it does have an impact. And as investors would like to know how companies are, again, taking advantage of the opportunities by being sustainable or are mitigating the risks from environmental pollution. Personally, I can attest to this because when we went into lockdown exactly this time last year, in March last year, there were pictures online because everyone was working from home, lockdown was very strict, and you could see the skyline in London. The difference between, because people weren't going out, because people weren't driving their cars, because people weren't taking the train, there were two contrasting pictures. One showed when we were in lockdown, the skyline and how clear it was, and the other showed how it was pre-lockdown. So again, you can see that these are things that we live with on a daily basis. But again, how do companies, mitigate the risks? How do they take advantage of the opportunities posed by these factors and incorporate that into their business models? And by doing that, how do investors then take a view and say, I would want to invest in this company because I think this company has thoroughly investigated ESG issues and is making the most of it. And the last is about governance. Governance is quite a huge topic as well. And governance, we've always, spoken about corporate governance, which is, we all know corporate governance, but governance is also very key because the way a company is run is very, very important. Do we have a principal agency problem? Do we have independent directors in the company, or do we have directors in the company who sit on the boards of other companies, and potentially there is a conflict of interest? And if there is potentially a conflict of interest, that would have an impact on the operations of that company. So again, just to sort of talk about governance, these are key considerations that investors would always look at. That is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. One of the key things that I hope I was able to leave with you this afternoon is the fact that there is a subtle distinction between ESG as a concept and social responsible investing as a concept. However, when you read the financial press, and I know this is still relatively new, sometimes they tend to slightly get modeled up in terms of how people think about what they are, but there is a subtle difference. And I know that over the next sort of over the short term, the financial services industry will essentially, because this is going to be part and parcel of what financial advisors do anyways. This will be gotten right, and this will be part and parcel of our lives. So thank you very much for having me on this afternoon. I'm more than happy to take any questions you might have, and I'll see if either Jania or Daniel will step in now. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Toyosi, for the wonderful presentation. I'd like to open the floor for anyone who has any questions. Please feel free to, I'm letting you unmute yourself, so you have the chance to unmute yourself if you want to ask any question. Please feel free and do so.
Thank you very much, Toyosi, for the presentation and for coming here again. Thanks.
Thank you.
And yeah, as Daniel said, so please do feel free to ask any questions, pop it in the chat box or unmute yourself. Have you unmuted them, Daniel? And
Yes, everyone could do that. Yeah.
your question. I think, did you get some questions sent to you? Whether there's something about at what age will be best time to start investing in pension, and if was it a student like going into the world of work, how early should they start their investment in pension? And if they do, they actually tell their portfolio managers that I want sustainable funds or impact investing. Can you touch on that, Tosi?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. It's never too early to start. I'll use myself as an example. When I was at university, that's when I started investing. So it's never. And the thing is, you might sometimes think, oh, am I too late into this? But the answer is no. You're never too late. So the simple answer is, if you want to start doing it now, yes, you can. In terms of financial advice, your financial advisor would guide you, and this is why people pay financial advisors to ask certain questions. So they will, and this is probably more relevant for people who are closer to retirement, but not necessarily. Your financial advisor would guide you in terms of what you need to do. However, there are also platforms out there that people use to invest. They're sort of called DIY platforms, do-it-yourself platforms. So the very common ones out there. You don't have to have massive amounts of money. You can invest little amounts of money in funds. You can put away, so like every month you can put away, set aside the odd £100. And again, you can start, if you imagine if you start doing that now, consistently, but by the time you start working, you will have built up something. And then obviously when you start working and you're earning good money, you can put aside more. So yes, it's not too early to start investing if you wanted to. If you're not sure about certain like terminologies, or if you think you get confused by because again, to be fair, some of these DIY platforms, not everyone would entirely understand the way they explain things. So again, just so that you're not entirely confused, yes, you can always look at searching for financial advice. if you did a Google search, for example, I know there's sort of different websites that will come up and say you have different financial advisors in my area, and these are the reputable ones that I can use, and so on and so forth.
Okay. So see, another question. There are two questions in the chat box, but I think one you might help us with, which is asking, is Aviva private SIPP using ESG and SRI? Do you know that? Is this something you are familiar with? The first question that came before that is asking if Coventry University, if we're doing ESG and SRI, I'm assuming that's socially responsible investing, if we're doing that. So I don't know you're the right person to answer that. And I also don't want to put our sustainability manager on the spot, but I promise Professor Ulrich, I will get back to you on that. But we do have an ethical investment strategy, because last year during the Green Week, we had 4 fund managers who came to talk about responsible investing. So I'll get back to you on that, Professor, and I'll let Toyosi answer the second part about the SIP and the ESG and SRI for Aviva.
Sorry, what was the question about Aviva? Sorry, Jalia.
So it's saying also, is Aviva private SIP using ESG and SRI?
The answer is I don't know.
Okay.
But there is a way you can check.
Great, because it links to the next question then, because Hazel is asking, how do I find out what my pension is already invested in? Do I just contact my pension holder? So these two questions are sort of linked.
That's absolutely fine. Very good question. So yes, it's something you can find out yourself, Hazel. What you would have to do is, obviously currently you have your pension invested somewhere. So when you log into your pension dashboard, so let's assume you worked with the University of Coventry, and the University of Coventry has done what we refer to as auto-enrollment. So they've enrolled you into a pension. When your employer enrolls you into a pension, obviously, they have invested you into certain funds. So yes, you can find out. All you need to do is contact either your current employer or your previous employer, as the case may be. Ask them for because they would have sent it to you anyways. And to be honest, not many people really look at their pensions, but that's fine. If you don't know where it is, you can reach out to them again, ask them for your login details. They'll send that to you. You will log into the dashboard. They'll ask you certain questions like your personal details. You log into the dashboard and you will see where your employer has been contributing pensions on your behalf for you. So it will tell you how much. So first of all, it will tell you when you started contributing, or when your employer started contributing for you, how much they were contributing on a monthly basis, how much the value of your pension currently is, and to your question, it will also tell you where that pension is invested. So it's something you can easily see. So for example, you will see things like the pie chart you have behind Jalia, for example. It will say it's invested in Apple, it's invested in BT, it's invested in Amazon. You know, it will tell you. And again, answering your questions about all the information will be there. And that's what you call a fund fact sheet. So the fund fact sheet will tell you where your pension assets are invested. It will tell you, because bear in mind again, fund managers who manage your pensions, obviously that is their job and they are paid for it. So they charge a fee on your pension as well. So it will tell you how much your pension fund is paying to the fund manager. All the information is there.
Thank you so much, Toyosi. And I don't know if you have a time for one more question, but we are almost there.
That's fine.
Okay, so thank you for that explanation. The question is, some people use the word moral money. Is it the same thing as SRI?
Moral money. I'm not sure I've come across that term before, but if I think about that, I would probably say yes, because I think I've also come across the term sin stocks. When people don't want to invest in companies that are aligned to, let's say, tobacco, for example, or alcohol, because again, that is social responsible investing. So yes, I would probably say yes. And remember that whole concept of moral money, that nicely ties into the concept of social responsible investing. Because as I said, with social responsible investing, as an individual, the number one overriding consideration is not the financial return. You're less interested in the financial return. You are interested in financial return, but it's not your overriding consideration. Your overriding consideration, using your concept of moral money, is this company a gambling company? Because that's your personal. Because my personal preference doesn't have to be Jalia's. We could disagree on something. So if that is the case, then yes, I would say moral money falls into that bracket.
Okay. I think we have to let you stop here. We don't want to. There is a lot going on, but we have to respect your time, and also our colleagues and guests are going to join another session. So thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Toyosi. I really enjoy, and I'm definitely going to come back to you again. I hope you will accept another invitation. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining in again. It's really a delight that you've all engaged and you've learned from here. Um, just to remind you, there are still activities going on this during this Green Week, so please click on the links as you can see on the slide. And of course, if you've got that already, you can go to the site and you'll be able to join in other activities as well. So thank you very much. Please feel free to contact us if you need any more information on anything. All right, it's a pleasure to see everybody.
Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and have a
Thank you,
great
Tayose.
rest of your Green Week.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye now.
Stop recording.